and their lives are the lives of modern young people travelling around, not just in Europe, but in the wider world. Global Britain, we're already there, don't worry. So we launched a European Citizens Initiative. I didn't know we had this right. I was looking at European citizenship on the European Parliament website, and I came across our rights under the treaty to petition, to invite the Commission to make a law to change the European statutes. It's kind of a super petition. It's not easy to sign. You have to give your address as well as your signature. If you live in Cyprus, you have to give Cyprus passport and identification numbers. So there are a number of hoops to go through. But we launched this petition. It was welcomed by Michel Barnier on the 22nd of March, a week before Theresa May triggered Article 50. Big mistake. She didn't have to do it, but she did. Now this petition, and you can all sign it on your phone. I'm going to come round afterwards with leaflets with the web address, and you can do it this afternoon. Not surprisingly, over 6,000 of our 7,000 endorsements have come from the UK. We have 11% of our quota in the UK. We need around 57,000, I think it is, in the UK to reach the quota. You have to reach the quota in 7 member states for it to count. And you have to get 1 million endorsements overall. Well, we're trying. We have endorsements from all 28 member states. Although in Slovakia we have only 1, and in Slovenia we have only 1. So there's a way to go, but we're working at it. And it's free. You don't have to pay. The Commission will help you to do it. They provide the software to collect the signatures. But we feel very strongly about this, as I think people who've taken the trouble to come this afternoon feel strongly. So I'd ask you to get your phones out later. I'm going to come round with leaflets to give the addresses, the website addresses where you can make the endorsement. But there are 3 categories of people covered by this initiative. The first is the people who are being used as bargaining chips. That is those of our fellow European citizens in this country, more than 3 million of them, who are in limbo. They don't know what their status is going to be after March 2019. Perhaps their status as European citizens will no longer be recognised. As one person said to me recently, we'll be foreigners. Well, they're citizens, they're fellow citizens, and the freedom of movement directives are citizens' directives. They're couched in those terms. We are part of a wider project, and many of us appreciate that project, which has really cemented the peace in Europe for more than 2 generations, including the coming down of the Berlin Wall and the extension of the European Union eastwards. You know, this is very significant stuff historically. The second category are those British nationals, UK nationals I should say, who live elsewhere in the EU 27. They don't know what their position is going to be either. Both these lots of people have exercised their rights of freedom of movement. But there's a huge third category, which is the rest of us. Somebody called us statics. You know, we stayed home. We didn't go and live in France or Belgium or Spain or Cyprus or wherever. But that didn't mean we weren't European citizens and conscious of it. On the contrary, we actually prided ourselves in the way our country had become hospitable and the kind of exciting place that it was prior to the referendum in 2016. Since then, if you saw the Panorama programme this week, you will know that racism has had the lid taken off of it, and all kinds of really unacceptable behaviour is going on. So, my plea to you is to join us here in Nottingham this afternoon to support the European Citizens Initiative on retaining European citizenship. Thank you very much.
I've just been digging around in my bag, and I believe I found exactly what Brexit is. Unicorn Fruit Loops. I'm sure they'll come in handy at some point. Yes, so thank you very much, Tony Simpson there for the European Citizens Initiative. And next up Now, I know many of you might be waiting with bated breath for me to actually give another musical performance. It will be after our next guest. Please welcome, if we can, Julia. Are you ready? Is Julia... Julia's bag's getting caught. She's almost ready. Please welcome, from the Liberal Democrats, Julia Cambridge.
Oh my goodness, before I start, I just wonder if I can have a bit of audience participation. So who here is a Remainer? Who here is a Ramona? And who here is the highest accolade, a saboteur?
We are reminders.
Okay. Now I think we ought to wear those labels with pride. It is the highest accolade, I believe. So, okay, a democracy that cannot change its mind ceases to be a democracy. Now, friends, those were the words of David Davis. And we'll be coming back to those later. Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Now, we're here in the shadow of the Brian Clough statue. Now, Brian Clough, I think you'll agree, might have been described a bit like Theresa May as a bloody difficult man. But even he didn't want to get out of Europe. And friends, we don't either, which is why we're here today to stop Brexit. And not because we're bloody minded, but because we're angry at the willful destruction of our and our children's futures. And friends, it's young people who are in the forefront of my mind today. I want to talk about young people, education and jobs. You know, in Nottingham here we have 2 world-class universities. And some of the country's 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds who voted Remain study there. Leading up to the referendum, they were told blatant and deliberate lies. 70% of young people who voted saw through the lies and voted Remain. And it's estimated that figure would be 82% had there been votes at 16, which there should now be. Now, 16 to 17-year-olds who didn't get the chance to vote on June the 23rd are justifiably angry at their inability to have a say on something which is going to impact their lives. You know, it's funny how Brexiteers who bang on about democracy don't want votes at 16. Does it surprise us? That's just another flaw in their vacuous and self-serving agenda. So let's talk about the 70% here. Those young people who voted Remain and those young people who didn't get a chance to vote. They've grown up in the 43 years that we've been a member of the EU. Europe was a doorway which they never imagined would be closed. Europe offered young people freedom to move between cities and countries, earning, working and learning. And Brexit has destroyed all that. Now, a young family friend told me that Brexit is a bit like your parents who are getting a very, very messy divorce and don't actually care how it will affect the children. And suffer they will if Brexit goes ahead. You know, the Women's Trust reported that young people overwhelmingly young women feel more anxious than they did last year, and found that the likelihood of leaving the EU magnified doubts about future prospects and the cost of living. And they're right to feel that way, because half of the top 75 graduate employers said that they're likely to lower the intake of graduates once we've left the EU. The Next Generation British Council study found that young people were emotional and angry after the vote, and they hope to work abroad in the future. But there'll undoubtedly be limited job opportunities in Europe due to the ending of freedom of movement, and it'll be harder and more expensive to study at European universities, which is something that young people tell us they want. We need EU students in Nottingham, and they should not be included in net migration targets. Come on. It's a scandal. Now this is astonishing. International students have contributed 25.8 billion to the UK economy. We need them, and they are vital. Now, Theresa May says that immigration is too high and it is impossible to build a cohesive society. Yet a high proportion of the public think that university students are valuable to social and cultural impact in towns and cities, and I agree with them. Another thing, friends, we also need EU staff in our higher education establishments. Brexit is damaging morale as well as recruitment. You know, there are over 33,000 academic staff in the UK universities, and as things stand, because of the crazy political football the government is kicking, these people have no assurances to stay past 2019. Give them an answer now, not in 2 years' time when they are demoralised and depleted. We want that. They deserve it. They are teaching our children. We also need assurances on programmes like Horizon 2020 and Erasmus. The funding for Horizon 2020 is available for the next 3 years, which takes us past the end of talks. Although this research and innovation programme is key to many scientific researchers in universities, the government hasn't committed to underwriting it. Another scandal. The vote to leave has unleashed a wave of discrimination, not just against citizens from the EU, but against the research community. Other EU countries are slamming the door on collaboration with us, and we cannot find partners for Horizon 2020. It is now out of our reach. And things aren't going to get better for young people post-Brexit. If there's a recession to follow the economic freefall, then basically reports say that the under-30s job prospects will suffer more than others. And once the recession is over, their future earnings will take another impact. But friends, there is help at hand. Things are not all bleak, because a good old Tory multi-millionaire peer has the answer. Apparently, Brexit is going to be good for young people. Get this, because we can make them work now more than 35 hours in shops. Well, that's ambitious, isn't it? Not all Tories have lost the plot. Nottingham's own Ken Clarke said this week, "I've never seen anything as chaotic and mad as this." Let's hear it for Ken. Not here, but not forgotten. And as an ex-chancellor, he probably understands economic Armageddon more than most. But not everybody is as sensible as Ken. A high proportion of leavers recently asked said that the economic downturn was a price worth paying. A price worth paying. This is the older generation wrongly deciding on the future for young people. And I agree with Vince Cable when he said, the martyrdom of the old comes cheap as they have so few jobs to lose. But friends, not all young people want to study. Some want to go straight into work. But work depends on a thriving economy. Leaving the EU with no deal is predicted to cost this country $400 billion by 2030. Where would the jobs be then? Now, I don't want young people's prospects ruined on the orders of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage and Michael Gove. A group of elite millionaires who are treating this like an eating, debating society game, where you speak with conviction about something you could not care less about. Now, in conclusion, friends, the referendum to leave the European Union was the first time my daughter ever got to vote. And this was an important moment. This was one of the leaflets that she got sent. Do you remember this? By the official Vote Leave. I've kept this. It has on it, of course, the legendary EU costs us 300 million per week. We could spend that on the NHS instead. Thank you. And I can say for somebody like many of you here, my father died prematurely with the good care of the NHS, and my mother was an NHS nurse all her working life. This is an insult to me and you. But something else caught my eyes here, friends, from the chairman of Wetherspoons. You couldn't make it up. He says, the EU tariffs on goods from outside the EU are bad for British shoppers in the developing world. What is this character, this clown, going to do when we leave with no deal and we're paying 40% tariffs? Unbelievable. Now, I'm glad that my daughter and so many young people saw through this fantasy fiction. Vince Cable is right to call for an exit from Brexit and a chance to vote in a new referendum on the final deal. Let the people have their say. That is democracy. And as David Davis says, a democracy that cannot change its mind ceases to be a democracy. Friends, continue to be on the right side of history. Speak out, speak up, and stop the destruction of our country for our children and protect their futures. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit distracted by the Hare Krishnas over there. That was Julia Cambridge from the Liberal Democrats. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to possibly give you an alternative performance whilst we have this, whilst we respect this disruption behind us, and give you a bit of an alternative performance. I'm going to change all. Right, is that better? I think that's better. Right. So, yes. What do you want me to talk about first? Libya or Brexiters? Come on, let's. Cake? Do you want to have your cake and eat it? I can sing about that later. I do believe that this lot behind us are probably advertising some vegan curry or something. But let me give you a somewhat offensive song about which cleverly frames, I'm sure you would agree, the words of Boris, the words of the real Boris at the words of the real Boris at a fringe event at the Manchester Conservative Party conference. Now, his exact words were, "There's a group of UK business people, wonderful guys, and they literally have a brilliant vision to turn Sirte in Libya into the next Dubai. The only thing they've got to do is clear the dead bodies away, and then they'll be there." Yes, he actually said that, just in case you can't believe it. Yes, the poet Luke Wright came up with this poem the same weekend, and I believe it frames his words very well. It's called "Once You Clear the Bodies." Come now, native, wipe that tear. All's not lost this time next year. We'll build a shopping centre here. Well, once you clear the bodies. Bring on the low-tax Costa Blanco. Bojo's on it, cheer up, Sambo. What you want's a brand new Nando's. Once you clear the bodies. That's it. Swap that spear for Lucre. Get some aircon. Splendid, super. Apple, Gucci, Ray-Ban, Uber. Once you clear the bodies. I feel for you. Hey, I've read Brooke. War's a horrid thing. Now look, it's British Airways. TUI, formerly known as Thomas Cook. Once you clear the bodies. So grab a broom, yes, quickly please. We'll bring old Blighty's expertise. No, me no speako bongo ease. Just clear the bloody bodies. The friendly guns have done their bit. Shock doctrine strikes, now dig that pit. We'll build a massive mall right here, and you can work in it. Once you clear the bodies. Yes, that's a framing of the real Boris's words there. A rather discomforting and terribly racist sounding one, which is basically very much suiting the real Boris. So while the noise continues behind you, I'll give you my own little speech before we get on. Gerhard Lumenbond, chair of the East Midlands Green Party. So here's my comment on the Brexiters. The hardline quitters in Britain, the Brexiters, are really funny. We must remember this. They're funny because they bang on about respecting democracy, yet at the same time they think that British citizens are not allowed to stand up to their government. They tell us, the opposition, to shut up and quit whining, even though a silenced opposition... Well, that's not really freedom, is it? If you're telling us what to do, you voted for freedom. You voted for freedom, didn't you, sweetheart? You voted for freedom, didn't you, sweetheart? Well, this is freedom. This is our freedom to protest. You see, like I say, they tell the opposition to shut up and quit whining, even though a silenced opposition is the complete antithesis of a democracy. They're funny because they have the entire internet to check facts with. We even had the chair of InFacts with us, who I'm sure could teach you a few things, dear boy. But they still can't name a single EU law that negatively affects the average British citizen. They're funny, the Brexiters are funny, because after the referendum, they were absolutely certain of the UK's prosperity. A bright future for global Britain, they said. They're funny because now their certainty has been backpedaled to crass, vacant optimism, literally optimism, that's the words from John Redwood. You know, be optimistic as you check your bank balance in a couple of years, and I'm sure your optimism will have made it grow somehow. Yes, optimism beyond reason. It will be different, but the country will still be okay, is essentially what they say. They're funny because now even that has given way to darker shades of optimism. Brexit will be bad for us, but only for 10 or 20 years. They're funny because even that darkest optimism has become the rest leaving the sinking Brexit ship. Yes, all right, it'll be crap for generations to come, but it'll be worth it. Our grandchildren will thank us. No, they won't. They're funny because they think that leaving an organisation responsible for keeping Europe so peaceful for so many years is something their grandchildren will thank them for somehow. No, they won't. They're funny because it didn't take much dirty money from multi-zillionaire, tax-dodging barons of the media and right-wing populists to urge people to fear the idea of staying in the EU. England's culture is obsessed with fear. Sorry, darlings, you're going to have to admit that. And all it took to convince most English people to vote leave was the easy programming of phrases like, take back our country. We never lost our country, but thanks to Brexiters, we may now stand to lose everything. They're funny because another word that programmed them so easily was sovereignty. But we never lost that either. Parliament is sovereign, and yet Brexiters shrieked in dismay at the idea of Parliament exercising that sovereignty by having an actual debate about Brexit. And even funnier is that this EU withdrawal bill, now going through Parliament, is about to compromise the very sovereignty of that Parliament, the very sovereignty that they believed they were protecting by voting leave. And there's a very serious risk to it. There's a very serious risk it will be gone soon enough, that sovereignty. They're funny, the Brexiters are funny, because they wanted control of our borders. Sean was just discussing, our organiser Sean was just discussing this with one earlier. But we already had that control, and now our seaports and our airports may be set to have queues for many hours. A trip to the continent will no longer be easy or pleasant or cheap. Things we had a lot of control over. How funny that we have indulged it so much.